When I arrived at my parents' house, my father shoved a bottle of harsh chemical cleaner into my hands and shouted, "Clean the kitchen and do not show up for dinner tonight. Do not embarrass me." My sister nodded, looking me up and down with pure disgust, adding that I was broke and would ruin their chances with a very important investor. I stared at the cold marble floor beneath my boots. The floor I had secretly paid for. They thought I was a worthless, unemployed failure. But when my husband walked into their corporate meeting a week later and finally spoke, their faces went completely pale. The air that late Tuesday afternoon was thick and humid, the kind of weather that makes your clothes cling uncomfortably to your skin. I pulled my 10-year-old gray sedan into the sweeping, circular driveway of my parents' estate. The gravel crunched loudly beneath my worn tires, a sound that always seemed to announce my inadequacy before I even stepped out of the car. I turned off the ignition and sat there for a long moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the familiar knot of anxiety that formed in my stomach every time I visited this house. I was 28 years old, yet pulling into this driveway always made me feel like a helpless, scolded child all over again. I reached into the passenger seat and grabbed the large, carefully arranged fruit basket I had bought from the upscale market across town. It was heavy, filled with exotic pears, artisanal cheeses, and imported grapes. I had spent nearly $200 on it, hoping it would be a peace offering, a way to show my father, Thaddeus, and my mother, Cressida, that I cared about them. I walked up the wide stone steps, the heavy oak front door looming in front of me. I did not even get the chance to ring the doorbell. The door swung open violently. My father stood there, his face flushed red with a mixture of panic and deep-seated anger. He was already dressed in his tailored navy suit, the one he only wore when he was trying to project an image of extreme wealth and untouchable success for his logistics company, Thaddeus Freight. Before I could even offer the basket, before I could even say hello, he stepped forward and blocked the entrance. His eyes darted nervously over my shoulder toward the empty driveway, as if expecting someone much more important to arrive at any second. "What are you doing here right now, Vesper?" he hissed, his voice a harsh, frantic whisper. "I told you we were busy today." "I brought a gift," I said quietly, holding up the basket. "I wanted to wish you luck with the big investment dinner tonight." Thaddeus barely glanced at it. He snatched a spray bottle of industrial surface cleaner and a rough yellow sponge from a nearby console table and practically shoved them into my chest. I had to awkwardly juggle the heavy fruit basket to keep it from dropping. "I do not care about your fruit," he spat out. "Una had her friends over last night, and the kitchen is a complete disaster. The catering team arrives in 2 hours. Scrub the kitchen floor. Clean the counters. And when you are done, you need to leave out the back door. Clean the kitchen and do not show up for dinner tonight. Do not embarrass me." The words hit me like a physical blow to the chest. I stood frozen on the welcome mat. Embarrass me. That was how my own father viewed my existence. I looked down at my simple, slightly oversized knitted sweater and my faded denim jeans. They were clean, they were comfortable, but they did not scream money. They did not have designer logos plastered across the chest. "You want me to clean up after Una's party?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly despite my best efforts to keep it even. "Dad, I came here to visit. I am your daughter, not your maid." "Oh, please, Vesper, spare us the dramatic victim act." I looked up. My younger sister, Una, was descending the grand sweeping staircase. She looked like she had just stepped out of a high-fashion magazine. She was wearing a stunning emerald green silk dress, and her feet were strapped into a pair of Jimmy Choo heels that I knew cost at least $1,200. Her hair was perfectly blown out, cascading over her shoulders in flawless waves. She paused on the bottom step, crossing her arms and looking down her nose at me with a smirk that made my blood run cold. "Dad is right," Una said, her voice dripping with condescension. "You are broke, Vesper. You are unemployed. The man coming tonight is a major player from a massive venture capital firm. We cannot have you sitting at the dining table in your thrift store rags, talking about whatever tiny, insignificant little hobby you are pretending is a job these days. You would completely ruin our image." I stared at her perfectly manicured nails, then at her expensive shoes. My heart hammered against my ribs. Unemployed. Broke. A hobby. That was what they called the technology startup I had built from absolutely nothing over the last 6 years. They had laughed when I started it in my tiny apartment. They had rolled their eyes every time I skipped family vacations to write code and pitch to small investors. But what Una did not know, what my father standing there with his chest puffed out did not know, was that exactly 4 days ago, I had signed a contract. I had quietly, privately sold my little hobby to a massive tech conglomerate. The ink was dry. The transfer had cleared. I currently had exactly $25 million sitting securely in my personal bank account. I could have bought their entire estate right then and there with a single wire transfer. I could have bought Una 1,000 pairs of those shoes without blinking. But looking at their sneering faces, feeling the cold weight of the cleaner bottle in my hand, I realized something fundamental. Money would not change how they saw me. If I told them about the $25 million now, they would simply demand it. They would feel entitled to it. Hurry up, Thaddeus snapped, snapping his fingers in front of my face, pulling me out of my thoughts. The VIP guest expects perfection. Do not mess this up for us, Vesper. Go to the kitchen. I looked at my father. Really looked at him. I saw the desperation sweating through his expensive cologne. I saw the cruel entitlement in my sister's eyes. I did not argue. I did not scream. I simply set the heavy fruit basket on the floor, gripped the bottle of cleaner, and walked past them toward the kitchen. But the silence I carried with me was not submission. It was the calm before a very, very destructive storm. If they wanted me to be their invisible servant today, I would play the part perfectly. But what happens when the servant holds all the cards? The kitchen was massive, a sprawling expanse of white Italian marble countertops, stainless steel commercial appliances, and custom oak cabinetry. But right now, it looked like the aftermath of a frat house party. Sticky puddles of spilled wine stained the floor. Half-empty cocktail glasses were scattered across the island. Crushed potato chips and smeared dips coated the pristine white surfaces. Una and her friends had truly outdone themselves in their careless destruction. I dropped to my knees on the cold marble floor. The chill seeped through my jeans instantly. I sprayed the harsh chemical cleaner onto the sticky red wine stain near the refrigerator and began to scrub. The sharp, toxic smell of bleach and artificial lemon immediately filled my lungs, making my eyes water. But the tears that pricked at the corners of my eyes were not just from the chemicals. Each harsh scrape of the rough sponge against the stone felt like I was physically unearthing years of buried resentment. Being the scapegoat of this family was not a new development. It was a role I had been forced into for as long as I could remember. I scrubbed harder, watching the red liquid dilute into a pale pink foam. The repetitive motion threw my mind back to a chilly autumn morning when I was 19 years old. I had been working double shifts at a local diner and tutoring high school kids in math to save up for my college tuition. I had been accepted into an excellent business program, and I needed exactly $8,000 to cover my first semester because Thaddeus had claimed his business was going through a transition phase, and he could not help me. I had finally hit my savings goal. I remember walking into the bank branch, exhausted but glowing with immense pride, to get a cashier's check. The teller, a kind older woman, had looked at her computer screen, frowned, and then looked back at me with profound pity. "Honey, there is only $42 in this account." My heart had dropped into my stomach. It was a joint account my father had set up for me when I was a minor. I had run home, frantic, breathless, thinking I had been robbed. When I confronted Thaddeus in his study, he did not even look up from his newspaper. Una needed a reliable car for her new internship, he had said casually, as if discussing the weather. "You're smart, Vesper. You can take out student loans. Una needs to project success to be successful. That money went to a down payment on a sports car. It is an investment in the family's future." My college fund. My blood, sweat, and blistered feet. Gone. Turned into a shiny red convertible for the golden child. I had cried until I threw up that day, but no one comforted me. Cressida had simply told me to stop being dramatic and to support my sister. I moved to the next stain, a hardened lump of melted cheese near the stove. My knuckles ached as I scraped at it. The memories kept coming, relentless and suffocating. For years later, I had moved back home briefly after college, drowning in the student debt my father had forced me to take. I had spent 6 months meticulously researching and writing a comprehensive business plan for a new logistics software. It was brilliant. It would optimize delivery routes and save companies hundreds of thousands of dollars. I printed it out, bound it beautifully, and left it on my father's desk, hoping to finally earn his respect, hoping he would see my worth. 2 weeks later, at a grand family dinner, Thaddeus raised a glass of champagne to toast Una. She had just been promoted to marketing director at Thaddeus Freight. Her big accomplishment? She had presented a revolutionary new software integration plan to the board. It was my plan, word for word. She had stripped my name off the title page and replaced it with hers. When I stood up at the table, my voice shaking with rage, and accused her of stealing my work, the room went dead silent. Una squeezed out a few crocodile tears. Thaddeus had slammed his fist on the table, rattling the fine china. He called me a jealous, bitter liar. He told me that I was a failure trying to drag my successful sister down, and he ordered me to pack my bags and move out the next morning. I was thrown out onto the street with nothing but a suitcase and a broken heart, all because I dared to claim my own hard work. I leaned back on my heels, wiping a strand of hair out of my sweaty forehead with the back of my wrist. I looked down at the beautiful, intricate veining of the marble floor I was currently cleaning. A bitter, ironic laugh escaped my lips, echoing loudly in the empty, cavernous kitchen. They loved this floor. They loved this house. They paraded it around like a trophy. But they did not know the truth about it. 5 years ago, Thaddeus Freight hit a catastrophic financial wall. They were weeks away from bankruptcy, weeks away from the bank foreclosing on this very estate. Thaddeus was a prideful man. He hid it well, but I had a friend who worked at their primary lending bank. I knew everything. Despite how they had treated me, despite the stolen money and the stolen ideas, I still felt a twisted sense of obligation. I was doing well in my early software career, and I had managed to secure a massive early-stage funding round for my own company. I took out a massive personal loan against my own equity and set up an anonymous trust fund. I used that anonymous trust to quietly pay off the ballooning mortgage on this house. I saved them from total ruin. They never knew it was me. Thaddeus bragged to his friends that a silent angel investor who recognized his genius had bailed the company out. I let them believe it. I wanted to be the bigger person. I wanted to break the cycle of cruelty. And this was my reward. 5 years later, the silent angel investor was on her hands and knees, scrubbing wine stains off the floor she bought, because her sister was too lazy to clean up her own mess, and her father was too ashamed of her to let her eat at the same table as his guests. I squeezed the yellow sponge tightly, the dirty water dripping down my wrists. The sadness that usually gripped my heart when I thought about my family was suddenly gone, entirely evaporated. In its place, a cold, hard, unyielding resolve began to solidify. I would finish cleaning this floor. I would leave through the back door just like he asked. But I was done being the victim. I was done being the sacrificial lamb on the altar of their fragile egos. I am going to make them see exactly who they have been stepping on all these years. I had just thrown the dirty sponge into the trash can and was wiping down the last of the stainless steel counters when the heavy kitchen doors swung open. My mother, Cressida, walked in. She was wearing a stunning silver evening gown, her neck dripping with diamonds that I strongly suspected were rented. The click-clack of her heels on the freshly cleaned marble echoed sharply. She stopped in the center of the room, running a critical finger along the edge of the island counter. She inspected her fingertip for dust, found none, and offered a tight, emotionless nod. She did not look at my raw, red hands. She did not ask how my day was. She did not ask about my life. "Adequate," she murmured, her tone flat and dismissive. She opened her expensive clutch purse, rummaged around for a moment, and pulled out a single, crumpled $20 bill. She did not hand it to me. Instead, she dropped it onto the counter, letting it flutter down like a dead leaf. "Buy yourself some decent food on the way home, Vesper. And please, make sure you go out through the side gate." The caterers are setting up out front, and we cannot have you getting in their way. Drive safely." She turned on her heel and walked out before I could even formulate a response. The doors swung shut behind her with a soft, definitive thud. I stared at the $20 bill sitting on the pristine counter. It was the ultimate insult. A tip for the hired help. A pathetic, dismissive gesture meant to ease whatever microscopic sliver of guilt she might have felt. I did not touch the money. I left it sitting there. I grabbed my worn jacket, slung my purse over my shoulder, and walked out the back door, stepping out into the chilly, damp evening air. The sky had opened up and a steady, cold rain was falling. I did not run. I walked slowly around the perimeter of the massive house, listening to the muffled sounds of laughter and clinking glasses starting to drift from the formal dining room. The catering trucks were indeed parked out front, men in crisp white shirts unloading silver trays. I kept my head down, slipping through the side gate like a trespasser, and climbed into my freezing, damp car. When I finally turned the key in the ignition and the old engine sputtered to life, the dam broke. I gripped the steering wheel and sobbed. I wept until my chest physically ached, the sound of my crying masked by the heavy rain beating against the windshield. I was not crying because I wanted their money. I was not crying because I was poor. I wasn't anymore. I was crying because I had spent 28 years desperately trying to earn the love of people who were fundamentally incapable of loving me back. I grieved for the parents I never truly had, and the sister who viewed me only as a stepping stone. The drive back to my own home was a blur of neon streetlights and swishing windshield wipers. It took me 45 minutes to navigate through the heavy city traffic, my mind replaying the humiliation at the front door over and over again. I finally pulled into the driveway of the modest, comfortable 3-bedroom house I shared with my husband, Leander. I sat in the car for a moment, wiping my face, trying to compose myself. I did not want him to see me like this. Leander was a good man, the best man I had ever known. We had met 3 years ago at a tiny coffee shop near my first miserable office space. He was dressed in a plain black t-shirt and jeans, reading a thick book on economic theory. He had asked to share my table because the cafe was full. We started talking, and we never really stopped. He was quiet, incredibly intelligent, and remarkably observant. We had married in a small, private courthouse ceremony 2 years later. My family did not attend. They said they were too busy with the quarterly fiscal review to make the trip. Leander had just held my hand, kissed my forehead, and told me that we were our own family now. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the warm, inviting hallway. The incredible smell of roasting garlic and rosemary immediately hit me. Leander was in the kitchen, standing at the stove, stirring a pot of homemade marinara sauce. He was wearing his usual gray sweatpants and a faded college t-shirt. He turned his head as he heard the door close. His warm brown eyes scanned my face for exactly 2 seconds before he turned off the stove and walked straight toward me. He didn't ask how the visit was. He didn't ask why my eyes were red and swollen. He simply wrapped his strong arms around me and pulled me tight against his chest. "I've got you," he whispered into my wet hair. "I've got you." I broke down again, burying my face in his shirt. We stood there in the hallway for a long time until my breathing finally leveled out. He gently led me to the sofa, sat me down, and handed me a glass of warm water. "Tell me," he said softly, sitting beside me and taking both of my raw, red hands in his. And so, I told him everything. I told him about the fruit basket my father rejected. I told him about the bottle of cleaner. I told him about Una's $1,200 shoes and her vicious comments about me being an unemployed embarrassment. I told him how I had to scrub the wine stains off the marble floor on my hands and knees while they prepared to entertain their deeply important VIP guest. Leander listened in total silence. He did not interrupt. He did not offer hollow platitudes. But as I spoke, I watched a dark, terrifying storm gather in his eyes. The gentle, quiet man who made me pasta was disappearing, replaced by something fierce and intensely protective. His jaw tightened so hard I thought his teeth might crack. "They made you scrub the floor," Leander repeated, his voice dangerously low, almost a growl. And they banned you from dinner because they were afraid you would embarrass them in front of an investor. Yes, I whispered, staring down at my water glass. Some massive venture capital firm. Thaddeus was sweating through his suit over it. Leander remained very still for a long moment. He slowly reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear. Vesper, he asked softly, though the underlying tension in his voice was palpable. Did they happen to mention the name of the man who was coming to dinner? Or the name of the firm? I don't know the firm, I sniffled, trying to remember. But when I was leaving, I heard Una yelling at the caterers. She said they needed to make sure they served the vintage Cabernet because that was what a man named Gideon liked. The silence that followed was so absolute, so heavy, that all I could hear was the steady ticking of the clock on the wall. Leander stared at me, his eyes wide, an unreadable expression washing over his features. If you have ever felt the sting of being cast aside by the people who are supposed to protect you, please leave a subscribe to give me strength. Because what Leander said next completely changed the trajectory of all our lives. Gideon, Leander repeated. It was not a question. It was a statement of profound disbelief. He let go of my hands and slowly stood up from the sofa. He began to pace the length of our small living room, running his hands roughly through his dark hair. I watched him, confused and suddenly anxious. Leander was never prone to dramatic reactions. He was the most grounded, level-headed person I knew. To see him pacing like a caged animal was alarming. Lee? I asked softly. What is it? Do you know a Gideon? He stopped pacing and turned to face me. He let out a short, sharp laugh that held absolutely zero humor. It was a sound of pure, bitter irony. Know him? Leander said, shaking his head. Vesper, Gideon is my subordinate. He is a senior analyst. He reports directly to my desk every Monday morning at 8 o'clock. I blinked, my brain struggling to process the information. Your subordinate? But, wait. My father said this guy was from a massive venture capital firm. A major player. Leander walked back over to the sofa and sat down heavily beside me. He took a deep breath, looking deeply into my eyes. Vesper, we need to talk. I need to explain something about my work. Something I should have explained a long time ago, but you were always so focused on building your own company, and I wanted us to have a normal, quiet life at home. I did not want my world to overshadow yours. My heart started to beat a little faster. What are you talking about? You know I work in finance. You know I work for Apex Capital. Yes, I said slowly. You are a financial manager. You analyze risk portfolios. That is what I tell people at dinner parties, so they do not ask me for money, Leander said gently. He reached out and grasped my hands again. Vesper, I am not just a manager at Apex Capital. I am the managing partner. I am the CEO. I founded the firm 10 years ago with 2 other partners, and I bought them out 3 years ago. I own Apex Capital. The room seemed to spin slightly. I stared at my husband, the man wearing faded gray sweatpants, the man who clipped coupons for grocery shopping because he said it was efficient. You own it? I stammered. Yes. We manage over $4 billion in assets, Leander said calmly, though his eyes never left mine. And right now, your father's company, Thaddeus Freight, is desperately begging us for a $15 million emergency cash injection to avoid total bankruptcy. They have been courting my firm for 2 months. Gideon was sent to your parents' house tonight to conduct a preliminary, informal character assessment. He is there on my direct orders. I sat completely paralyzed. The irony of the universe crashed down upon me like a tidal wave. Thaddeus and Una had humiliated me, handed me a bottle of bleach, and banished me from their home because they were terrified my worn clothes would offend a man who worked for my husband. They had treated me like dirt to impress the employee of the man who slept next to me every night. Leander's face hardened, his eyes turning to ice. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his cell phone. I am calling Gideon right now, Leander stated, his thumb hovering over the screen. I am telling him to walk out of that dining room. I am killing the deal. Thaddeus Freight will not see a single dime from Apex Capital. I will let them go bankrupt. No one treats my wife like a servant. No one. He was furious. It was a beautiful, terrifying kind of fury, the kind of anger born entirely out of love and fierce protection. For a split second, I wanted to let him make the call. I wanted to imagine the look on Thaddeus's face when the VIP guest stood up mid-meal and walked out, taking the financial lifeline with him. But then, a different thought crystallized in my mind. A sharper, colder, and much more calculated thought. Simply killing the deal from afar would ruin them, yes. But they would never know why. They would just blame the market. They would blame bad luck. They would never, ever face the consequences of their own cruelty. I reached out and placed my hand over Leander's, pushing the phone down. "No," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Do not cancel the deal. Not yet." Leander frowned, confusion replacing the anger in his eyes. "Vesper, why? After what they just did to you. They do not deserve my money. They do not deserve a lifeline." "You are right. They don't," I replied, a small, grim smile touching my lips. "But if you cancel it now, they learn nothing. Thaddeus will just spin it as a tragic corporate loss. Una will still walk around in $1,200 shoes pretending she is a business genius. They need to understand exactly who holds the power over them." I looked at Leander, my mind racing, connecting the dots of the $25 million sitting in my bank account and the immense financial leverage my husband held in his hands. "Let the process continue," I told him, my eyes locking onto his. "Let Gideon give them a positive review tonight. Let them think they have secured the lifeline. Let them get comfortable. Because when the time comes to finalize the paperwork, they are not going to deal with Gideon. They are going to deal with us." Leander watched me for a long moment. Slowly, the anger in his face melted into a look of profound respect and dark, shared understanding. He set his phone down on the coffee table. "All right," he said softly, leaning in to kiss my forehead. "We play it your way. We let them dig their own grave." The game had fundamentally changed. They thought they had banished the weakest link. They had no idea they had just declared war on the only people who could save them. For agonizing days passed. Days in which I went about my normal routine, researching new tech investments, drinking coffee with Leander in the mornings, and trying to push the memory of the cold marble floor out of my mind. But the tension in our house was thick. We were waiting for the other shoe to drop. We knew the financial situation at Thaddeus Freight was a ticking time bomb, and Leander was quietly monitoring the internal reports Gideon was filing at Apex Capital. Then, on a gloomy Friday afternoon, my phone rang. I was sitting at the kitchen island with my laptop open. The caller ID flashed my father's name. I stared at the screen as it vibrated against the granite counter. He had not called me since the incident. He had not texted to apologize or even check if I had made it home safely in the rain. I took a deep breath, met Leander's eyes across the kitchen, and hit accept. I put the phone on speaker so we could both hear. "Hello, Dad," I said, keeping my voice utterly neutral. "Vesper." Finally. His voice was frantic, lacking all the usual pompous authority he carried. He was breathing heavily, as if he had just run a mile. He sounded completely panicked. "What is going on?" I asked. "Everything is a disaster," Thaddeus gasped out. "An absolute catastrophe. The central distribution warehouse downtown just got hit by a surprise inspection from the city. They found multiple severe structural code violations. Things I thought were taken care of. They chained the doors shut, Vesper. They suspended our operating license pending emergency repairs." I looked at Leander. He raised an eyebrow but remained silent. "That sounds bad," I offered calmly. "Bad? It is the end of the world." Thaddeus shouted through the phone, the desperation cracking his voice. "We have dozens of shipping contracts we cannot fulfill. But that is not even the worst part. The worst part is the investors. The VIP from Apex Capital who came to dinner on Tuesday, he gave us a glowing review. We were days away from finalizing a $15 million investment. But if Apex finds out our main warehouse is chained shut by the city, they will pull the offer immediately. We will be bankrupt by next Friday. I will lose the house. Una will lose her job." The mention of Una's job almost made me laugh out loud, but I bit my lip hard. "So what do you expect me to do about a warehouse code violation, Dad? I don't work for the city. I need money, Vesper. Immediately." By Monday morning, the sheer audacity of the demand hung in the air. I let the silence stretch out, forcing him to sit in it. For days ago, I was not fit to eat dinner in his house because I was unemployed and broke. Now, I was his emergency bank. Money? I finally said, feigning confusion. Dad, Una made it very clear on Tuesday that I am broke. Remember? You made me scrub the floor. Do not throw that in my face right now. This is family business. This is an emergency. Thaddeus barked, reverting to his bullying tactics. I am not asking you for the money. I know you do not have it. But your husband, Leander, he works in finance, doesn't he? He must have access to personal loans or lines of credit. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter. He wanted my husband, the man he had never bothered to get to know, the man whose wedding he skipped, to take out a loan for him. How much do you need? I asked, my voice dangerously soft. $50,000, Thaddeus said rapidly. Just $50,000. It is to cover the emergency contractors working through the weekend, and to pay an expedited processing fee to the city inspector to get the chains off the doors before Apex Capital does their final site walk on Tuesday. If we can get the warehouse open by Tuesday morning, the Apex deal goes through, and I can pay Leander back within a month with interest. $50,000. To him, it was a desperate bribe. To me, it was pocket change. But the shamelessness of asking the daughter he abused to beg her husband for a loan to save his skin was breathtaking. You want Leander to take out a $50,000 loan to bribe a city inspector? I clarified, making sure the words were spoken out loud. It is not a bribe, it is an expediting fee. Thaddeus snapped defensively. Listen to me, Vesper. If this company goes under, your mother and I are out on the street. We lose everything. I know we have had our differences, but you cannot be so selfish as to let your own family be destroyed when you have a way to help. Talk to Leander. Get the money. I need a cashier's check by Monday. He was using guilt, his favorite weapon. He expected me to cave, just like I always had when I was younger. He expected me to be the good, obedient scapegoat who took the beatings, but still showed up to bleed for them when demanded. I looked at Leander again. He was leaning against the refrigerator, his arms crossed over his chest. He slowly shook his head side to side, silently telling me to end the call, to tell Thaddeus to go to hell. But I held up one finger, asking Leander for trust. Okay, Dad, I said into the phone, injecting just enough fake hesitation into my voice to make it believable. I will talk to Leander. I will see if he can secure a $50,000 cashier's check. I heard a massive sigh of relief on the other end of the line. Thank you, Vesper. I knew you would do the right thing. Have him bring the check to my office on Monday morning. First thing. No, I countered sharply. If we are doing this, we do it on my terms. I am not acting as your delivery girl. If Leander gets this money, we will bring it to you on Tuesday morning. Directly to the final meeting with Apex Capital. Tuesday? At the Apex meeting, Thaddeus sounded hesitant, panicked again. Vesper, no, that is too risky. What if the Apex executives see you? What if they ask questions? You do not have the right clothes for a corporate environment like that. The insult rolled off me like water off a duck's back. It didn't hurt anymore. It just fueled the fire. Those are my terms, Dad. We bring the check to the Apex building on Tuesday morning, or we don't bring it at all. Your choice. There was a long, suffocating pause. I could hear him grinding his teeth. Fine, he finally spat out. Tuesday morning. Apex Capital headquarters downtown. 10 a.m. sharp. And Vesper, please, try to look presentable. Do not ruin this for us. He hung up the phone without saying goodbye. I set the phone down on the counter. The silence in the kitchen was heavy. Leander walked over to me, placing his hands on my shoulders. Why on earth did you agree to bring him a check? Leander asked, genuine confusion knitting his brow. We are not giving him $50,000 to cover up a warehouse violation. You are right, I smiled, turning to face my husband. We are not bringing him a check. But we needed a guaranteed invitation to that final meeting on Tuesday. He just gave us front row seats to his own execution. The weekend was not spent securing a $50,000 loan. It was spent digging a very deep, very precise grave. Once Leander understood my plan, he fully committed. He mobilized the massive resources at his disposal as the CEO of Apex Capital. We did not need to guess what was happening at Thaddeus Freight. Leander had legal access to all of the financial records Thaddeus had submitted to the firm for the investment betting process. But Thaddeus had sanitized those records. He had hidden the rot. Late Friday night, Leander hired a private, highly aggressive forensic auditor. He was a man named Marcus, someone Leander trusted implicitly to find buried bodies in corporate balance sheets. We gave Marcus full access to the digital files Thaddeus had submitted, and Leander used his leverage to legally pull the company's raw banking data from their lending institution. We spent Saturday and Sunday in Leander's home office, fueled by black coffee and cold takeout, watching Marcus work his magic on the dual monitors. By Sunday evening, Marcus leaned back in his leather chair, rubbing his tired eyes. "Your father is not just a bad businessman," Vesper, Marcus said, his voice gravelly from exhaustion. "He is actively covering up massive internal fraud." My stomach tightened. "Show me." Marcus brought up a series of highlighted spreadsheets on the large screen. "The warehouse code violations? That is just the tip of the iceberg. The reason the company has no cash reserves to fix a simple roof violation is because the money has been systematically bled out of the operating accounts for the last 14 months. He pointed a laser pointer at a series of recurring wire transfers. "Look at these outflows. 5,000 here, 12,000 there, 40,000 in one lump sum last December. They're all masked as consulting fees or marketing expenditures paid to a third-party vendor called Emerald Solutions." "Let me guess," Leander said, his arms crossed, his eyes dark. "Emerald Solutions does not exist." "Oh, it exists on paper," Marcus smirked grimly. "It is an LLC registered in Delaware. But when you trace the routing numbers for the receiving bank account..." He clicked a button, bringing up a new document. "The primary beneficiary and sole signatory of the Emerald Solutions bank account is Una." The air left my lungs. "Una?" I whispered. "Your sister has embezzled exactly $400,000 from Thaddeus Freight over the last 14 months, Marcus confirmed flatly. "She drained the company's emergency reserves." "That is why your father is begging you for $50,000. He needs to bribe a city official because his golden child stole the money meant for warehouse maintenance." $400,000. The number echoed in my head. While Una was standing on the staircase in $1,200 shoes, calling me broke and unemployed, she was wearing stolen money. She was a thief. She was the reason the family was facing bankruptcy. "Does my father know?" I asked, feeling a strange mix of nausea and vindication. "Does Thaddeus know Una stole it?" Marcus shook his head. "Unlikely. If he knew, he probably would have hidden it better. The transfers were buried deep in the marketing budget, which Una controls." "But..." Marcus clicked to another screen, displaying a scanned signature page. "Look who authorized the quarterly budget approvals that allowed these transfers to clear the accounting department." I leaned in, squinting at the screen. The elegant, cursive signature was unmistakable. "My mother," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Cressida." "Cressida is the chief financial officer on paper," Leander noted, his jaw tight. "She signs off on the ledgers." "She knows," I realized, the full, sickening truth washing over me. "My mother knows Una stole $400,000. She signed the authorizations to hide it as marketing expenses. They covered it up to protect Una, and they let the company bleed to death. And now, they want my husband to take out a loan to save them from the consequences of their own crimes." The sheer toxicity of my family was laid bare on the glowing computer monitors. They were not just cruel, they were corrupt. They were perfectly willing to destroy everything to maintain the illusion of Una's perfection. Leander reached out and squeezed my shoulder. "We have the bank statements. We have the routing numbers. We have the signature authorizations." Marcus compiled everything into a certified forensic report. "It is bulletproof." I looked at the thick, bound folder resting on the edge of the desk. It contained the power to send my sister to federal prison for wire fraud and embezzlement. It contained the power to prove my mother was an accomplice. "Print 3 copies," I told Marcus, my voice devoid of any emotion. I was no longer the sad daughter crying in her car. I was the executioner preparing the block. Put them in secure binders. I turned to Leander. Are the final buyout papers ready? Leander nodded slowly. My legal team drafted them this morning. Apex Capital officially declines the $15 million investment. Instead, using the $25 million from your personal tech buyout, we have privately purchased the entirety of Thaddeus Freight's massive debt portfolio from their primary lenders. It was finalized an hour ago. I smiled, a cold, sharp expression that I had never felt on my face before. So, as of this evening, Leander confirmed, his eyes burning with intense anticipation, you are the sole owner of Thaddeus Freight's debt. If they default, which they will, tomorrow morning, you have the legal right to seize the company, their assets, and the estate. The trap was fully set. The bait had been taken. Tomorrow morning, my father, my mother, and my sister would walk into the glass and steel fortress of Apex Capital. They would walk in believing they were about to be saved by a faceless corporation. They would walk in expecting me to cower in the corner and hand over a $50,000 check like an obedient, pathetic dog. They were in for the shock of their miserable lives. They called me unemployed. They called me broke. But they didn't know I was holding the bank statements that could put them behind bars. Tomorrow, on the 40th floor, the game ends. The headquarters of Apex Capital was a towering fortress of black glass and brushed steel standing in the absolute center of the financial district. It was the kind of building that intimidated you before you even walked through the revolving doors. It projected cold, hard power. At 9:45 on Tuesday morning, I sat on a low-profile leather sofa in the expansive waiting area of the 40th floor. The walls were made of floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a dizzying, panoramic view of the city skyline below. I was dressed completely differently than I had been at my parents' house. I wore a tailored, charcoal gray suit that Leander had bought for me in Milan the previous year, paired with a simple silk blouse and classic black heels. I did not wear flashy jewelry or carry a bag covered in obnoxious designer logos. Real wealth, I had learned from my husband, whispered. Fake wealth screamed. I sat with my legs crossed, resting my hands perfectly still on my lap. The air conditioning was crisp, smelling faintly of expensive cedar and polished marble. My heart was completely calm. I was not nervous. I felt like a judge waiting for the defendants to take their seats in the courtroom. At exactly 9:50, the heavy frosted glass doors of the elevator bank slid open. Thaddeus, Cressida, and Una stepped out onto the 40th floor. I watched them closely before they noticed me. They looked like a picture-perfect wealthy family on a magazine cover, but because I knew them, I could see the cracks in the facade. Thaddeus was wearing his best custom-tailored suit, but his face was flushed, and a thin sheen of nervous sweat coated his forehead. He kept adjusting his silk tie, his eyes darting around the massive, imposing reception area. Cressida was holding her designer handbag so tightly her knuckles were white, her posture rigid with anxiety. And Una, true to form, was dressed like she was attending a Fashion Week gala rather than a desperate corporate bailout meeting. She wore a bright crimson dress and carried a massive leather tote bag, her chin tilted up in that familiar, arrogant sneer, trying to project a confidence she clearly did not feel. They marched to the reception desk. Thaddeus cleared his throat, trying to summon his usual booming, authoritative voice. Thaddeus Freight, he announced to the receptionist. We're here for the 10 o'clock final investment finalization meeting with Gideon and the Apex Executive Board. The receptionist, a perfectly poised woman in a navy blazer, smiled politely and typed something into her computer. Of course, sir. They are preparing the main boardroom for you now. Please take a seat in the waiting area, and someone will be right with you. Thaddeus turned around, taking a deep breath to calm his nerves. That was when his eyes locked onto me. He froze, his jaw practically unhinged. He blinked rapidly, as if his brain could not process the fact that the daughter he despised was sitting in the ultra-exclusive waiting room of the most powerful venture capital firm in the city. He recovered quickly, the initial shock morphing instantly into furious, hissing anger. He marched across the polished concrete floor, closing the distance between us in heavy, stomping strides. Cressida and Una followed right behind him, like loyal attack dogs. "What in the world are you doing here?" Thaddeus hissed, keeping his voice low so the receptionist would not hear, but vibrating with pure rage. "I told you to wait in the lobby downstairs. Are you trying to ruin this for us? Do you have any idea how sensitive this environment is?" I looked up at him, my expression completely blank. "You said you needed the $50,000. I told you I would meet you here." "Yes, but I meant outside the building, you absolute idiot," he spat, glancing nervously over his shoulder toward the hallway. "If the Apex executives see you sitting here, they're going to ask who you are. We cannot have them associating us with you. Give me the cashier's check right now and get out of here before you humiliate the family name." He held out his hand, palm up, expecting me to produce the money on command like an obedient servant. Una scoffed loudly, crossing her arms and looking me up and down. She clearly did not recognize the expensive cut of my Italian suit. To her, because it did not have a massive logo slapped across the chest, it was worthless. "Look at her, Dad," Una mocked, rolling her eyes. "She probably does not even have the money. I bet she just came up here to beg for a job. Or maybe to ask the receptionist where the nearest thrift store is. Seriously, Vesper, you're such an embarrassment. Your bag does not even have a brand name on it. Just give Dad the check your husband scraped together and go back to your miserable little life." Cressida finally spoke, her tone dripping with that familiar, icy disappointment. "Vesper, please. Stop causing a scene. You have always been so desperate for attention. Just give your father the money so we can go in and save the company. We do not have time for your childish games today." I looked at the three of them. The unholy trinity of my misery. For 28 years, these exact words, these exact looks of disgust, would have sent me running to my car in tears. I would have handed over the check, apologized for my existence, and spent the next 3 days hating myself. But today, their words sounded like hollow echoes in an empty canyon. They had no power over me anymore. I did not reach into my bag. I did not produce a check. I simply smiled. It was a terrifyingly calm smile. "I do not have a $50,000 check for you, Dad," I said smoothly, my voice echoing clearly in the quiet waiting area. Thaddeus's face went from red to a dangerous, pale purple. "What? What do you mean you do not have it? You promised. The city inspector is waiting for his fee. If we do not get that warehouse open by noon, Apex will pull the $15 million. You lied to me." "I said I would see you here," I replied, standing up slowly. I was taller than Una, and standing in my heels, I was almost eye level with my father. And here I am. Before Thaddeus could unleash the tidal wave of verbal abuse I saw building in his chest, the heavy double doors leading to the inner corporate sanctum swung open. Gideon, the senior analyst who had visited their house for dinner, stepped out into the waiting room. He was holding a sleek tablet and looking highly professional. Thaddeus instantly snapped out of his rage. His posture transformed in a millisecond. He plastered a massive, fake, sycophantic smile across his face and practically sprinted toward Gideon, extending his hand eagerly. "Gideon. Wonderful to see you again," Thaddeus boomed, his voice dripping with forced charm. "We are all here and ready to finalize the paperwork. I am so sorry about the slight disturbance in the waiting area. Just a minor family misunderstanding. We are completely focused on the future of Thaddeus Freight and our brilliant new partnership with Apex Capital." Gideon did not take my father's hand. He simply looked at Thaddeus with a blank, clinical expression. "Mr. Thaddeus," Gideon said smoothly, his voice devoid of any of the warmth he had shown at the dinner party. "The board is ready for you now. Please step into the main conference room." Thaddeus dropped his hand, looking slightly confused by the cold reception, but he nodded eagerly. He shot me one last, murderous glare, mouthing the words, "I will deal with you later," before following Gideon through the double doors. Cressida and Una marched right behind him. I waited 5 seconds. Then, I smoothed down the front of my jacket, picked up my nameless, custom-made leather bag, and walked right through the double doors behind them. I was stepping into the lion's den, but they did not realize that I was the one who locked the cage. The main conference room was a marvel of modern corporate design. It featured a massive, 20-foot-long table carved from a single piece of dark walnut, surrounded by plush black leather executive chairs. The walls were mostly glass, overlooking the sprawling city, making you feel as though you were floating above the world. Thaddeus, Cressida, and Una took their seats on one side of the massive table. They laid out their leather-bound folders, their pens, their meticulously sanitized financial reports. They looked ready to accept their $15 million salvation. I walked quietly into the room and took a seat at the very far end of the table, pulling my chair out silently. I sat down, crossed my legs, and waited. Una noticed me first. Her eyes widened in absolute shock and fury. She leaned over to my father and violently whispered in his ear, pointing a manicured finger in my direction. Thaddeus whipped his head around. If looks could physically burn, I would have been reduced to ashes on the spot. He started to stand up, his fists clenched, ready to march down the length of the table and physically drag me out of the room. Vesper, get out of this room right now before I call security. Thaddeus Whisper shouted, his face contorted with panic. You are going to destroy everything. Please take your seats, Gideon's voice rang out, cutting through Thaddeus's threat. Gideon stood at the head of the table, near the heavy wooden doors. But instead of sitting down in the large, high-backed chair designated for the executive leading the meeting, Gideon took 2 steps to the right. He stood by the wall, assuming the posture of a subordinate waiting for his commanding officer. Thaddeus slowly sat back down, completely bewildered. Gideon, are you not leading the finalization meeting? You reviewed our files. You came to my home. We served you our best vintage wine. I am a senior analyst, Mr. Thaddeus, Gideon replied, his tone perfectly flat. I conduct the preliminary groundwork. I do not authorize distributions of capital exceeding $10 million. The managing partner and CEO of Apex Capital handles all final acquisitions and debt restructuring personally. He will be joining you momentarily. Thaddeus gulped audibly. He reached for the crystal water glass in front of him, his hand visibly shaking. Una frantically adjusted her hair, probably preparing to flirt with whoever the wealthy CEO turned out to be. Cressida stared straight ahead, looking like a deer caught in the headlights. They were expecting an old, ruthless billionaire. They were expecting a stranger they could manipulate with fake financial projections and hollow promises. The heavy wooden doors clicked and then swung open wide. The room seemed to drop 10 degrees in temperature. Every ounce of oxygen was sucked out of the space. Leander walked into the conference room. He was not wearing his faded gray sweatpants or his old college t-shirt. He was wearing a bespoke, midnight blue Tom Ford suit that fit his broad shoulders flawlessly. His dark hair was styled immaculately. He wore a silver Patek Philippe watch on his left wrist. He radiated an aura of absolute, terrifying authority. He did not look like the quiet man who stirred pasta sauce in my kitchen. He looked like an apex predator who had just cornered his prey. He walked with measured, confident steps to the head of the walnut table. He did not sit down. He stood behind the large executive chair, placing his hands flat on the polished wood, and let his dark eyes sweep over the 3 people sitting across from him. The silence was deafening. It was a thick, suffocating blanket of absolute shock. Thaddeus's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked at Leander, then blinked rapidly, as if his eyes were deceiving him. He leaned forward, squinting. Leander. Thaddeus finally choked out, his voice sounding like a rusty hinge. What are you doing here? Did Vesper get you a job in the mailroom or something? You cannot be in here. The CEO is coming. Una let out a nervous, high-pitched giggle. Oh my God. He probably works in IT and got lost. This is so embarrassing for you, Vesper. Get your husband out of here before the boss arrives. Leander did not react to their insults. He did not even blink. He slowly unbuttoned his suit jacket and took his seat at the head of the table. He leaned back in the heavy leather chair, steepling his fingers together. I am not lost, Leander said, his voice deep, resonant, and echoing with absolute power. And I do not work in the mailroom, Thaddeus. I own this building. I founded this firm. I am the CEO of Apex Capital. I watched the exact moment reality shattered my father's brain. Thaddeus physically recoiled, pressing his back hard against his chair. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. His mouth opened and closed like a fish suffocating on dry land. The crystal water glass he had been holding slipped from his trembling fingers and tipped over, spilling water all over his sanitized financial reports, but he did not even notice. Cressida let out a sharp, audible gasp, pressing her manicured hand over her mouth. Her eyes darted wildly between Leander sitting at the head of the table and me sitting quietly at the far end. Una's arrogant sneer vanished entirely. The files she had been holding slid off her lap and crashed onto the floor. She stared at Leander, her brain utterly unable to process that the man she had mocked for years, the man whose wedding she refused to attend because he was a nobody, was the billionaire sitting on the throne of the financial world. You, Thaddeus stammered, sweat now pouring down the sides of his face. You are the CEO? But you drive an old car. You live in a normal house. You never said anything. I never felt the need to brag about my bank account to people who value money more than human decency, Leander replied coldly. You brought a $50 million logistics company to the brink of total ruin, Thaddeus. Did you honestly think a firm like mine would hand you $15 million without digging into the dirt first? Did you really think you could lie to us? I did not lie. Thaddeus panicked, his hands flying up in defense. The company is solid. It is just a minor cash flow issue. The warehouse violation is a misunderstanding. Give us the $15 million, Leander, please. We are family. Vesper is my daughter. Leander's eyes narrowed into dark, dangerous slits. Do not use her name. Do not ever claim her as family to save your own miserable skin. Not after what you made her do last Tuesday. Thaddeus swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing frantically. He realized, in that horrific moment, that the VIP guest he had been so terrified of offending was actually Leander's employee. He realized that the woman he had forced to scrub his floor with bleach was married to the man who held his entire existence in the palm of his hand. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had completely inverted. And the execution was only just beginning. Mr. Thaddeus, Gideon spoke up from his position against the wall. He walked forward and placed 3 thick, black, securely bound folders onto the table, sliding one directly in front of my father, one in front of my mother, and one in front of Una. These are the findings of our independent forensic audit, finalized at 2 o'clock this morning. Thaddeus stared at the black folder as if it were a live, explosive device. His hands shook violently as he reached out and flipped it open. We do not need an audit, Thaddeus pleaded, his voice cracking. I provided all the ledgers. The company just needs a bridge loan to get over this temporary hurdle. Leander leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. The sheer intensity of his gaze pinned my father to his chair. Open the folder to page 42, Thaddeus, Leander commanded. It was not a request. Thaddeus fumbled with the thick pages, tearing one in his frantic haste. He finally reached the page. It was a heavily highlighted spreadsheet showing external wire transfers from the Thaddeus Freight Emergency Reserve accounts. What is this? Thaddeus whispered, completely lost. That, Leander said, his voice slicing through the silence like a scalpel, is a detailed record of exactly $400,000 being systematically drained from your company over the past 14 months. Money that was earmarked for warehouse maintenance and employee benefits. Money that vanished into a shell company called Emerald Solutions. Thaddeus looked up, his face a mask of utter confusion. Emerald Solutions? I have never authorized a vendor by that name. We do not do business with them. This must be a banking error. A hack. It is not a hack, I spoke up for the first time. My voice was calm, clear, and projected down the length of the long wooden table. Every eye in the room snapped to me. I looked directly at my sister. Una was practically hyperventilating. Her perfectly applied makeup could not hide the absolute terror washing over her face. She was sinking lower and lower into her heavy leather chair, looking frantically toward the exit as if debating whether to make a run for it. Turn to page 45, Dad, I instructed, my eyes never leaving Una's terrified face. Look at the ownership documents for Emerald Solutions. Thaddeus flipped the pages. He read the document. He read it again. He brought the paper up an inch from his face, his eyes widening in horror. Una? Thaddeus choked out, the word tearing from his throat. He turned to his golden child, his favorite daughter, the one he had stolen my college fund to support. Una, your name is on this bank account. You own Emerald Solutions? You transferred $400,000 of company money into your own pocket. No, Daddy, it is a lie. They are faking it. Una shrieked, bursting into dramatic, hysterical tears. Vesper fabricated this to ruin me. She has always been jealous of me. You know she is a liar. The bank routing numbers are certified by federal auditors, Leander stated coldly, shutting down her pathetic attempt at manipulation instantly. We traced the IP addresses for the transfers. They originated from your personal laptop, Una. You used the company's emergency funds to buy designer clothes, luxury vacations, and $1,200 shoes. You are the reason the warehouse roof collapsed. You are the reason the company is bankrupt. Thaddeus looked like he had been struck by lightning. The illusion of his perfect daughter shattered into a million irreparable pieces right in front of his eyes. He slumped in his chair, running his hands over his face, a broken, hollow sob escaping his lips. My own daughter, he whispered, devastated. You destroyed my life's work for shoes. Keep reading, Thaddeus, Leander pushed, merciless. Look at page 48. Look at who authorized the accounting department to clear those fraudulent transfers without raising red flags. Thaddeus slowly turned the page. He stared at the signature block. He froze. He slowly turned his head to look at his wife. Cressida was sitting rigidly, her face as pale as a ghost, staring blankly at the polished wood of the table. Cressida? Thaddeus asked, his voice breaking completely. You signed these? You authorized the transfers? You knew she was stealing $400,000 and you helped her hide it as marketing expenses. She is our daughter, Thaddeus, Cressida whispered, a tear finally escaping her eye and rolling down her cheek. She made a mistake. She got into some personal credit card debt trying to maintain her image. I had to protect her. If the board found out, she would be ruined. You protected her? Thaddeus roared, suddenly slamming his fists on the table, making the water glasses jump. You protected her while driving us into financial ruin? You let me beg Vesper for $50,000 to bribe an inspector because you gave all our money to this spoiled brat. The toxic family dynamic was imploding in spectacular fashion. The enabler, the golden child, and the narcissist were finally turning on each other, tearing themselves apart from the inside out. Please, Leander, Thaddeus suddenly begged, turning back to my husband, tears streaming down his face. He completely threw his wife and his favorite daughter under the bus. You see what I have been dealing with. They lied to me. But the core business is still good. Just give me the $15 million. I will fire Una today. I will divorce Cressida. Just save the company. For Vesper's sake. Leander looked at my father with utter, unadulterated disgust. You really are a pathetic man, Thaddeus, Leander said softly. You steal from one daughter, you protect the other while she robs you blind, and the moment the ship sinks, you throw everyone overboard to save yourself. Leander stood up from his chair. He picked up a single, crisp white envelope that had been sitting on the table in front of him. Apex Capital is formally declining your request for a $15 million investment, Leander announced. The words echoed like a death sentence in the room. Thaddeus let out a loud, pathetic wail, dropping his head onto the table, weeping openly. Una sobbed uncontrollably into her hands. Cressida just stared at the wall, completely broken. However, Leander continued, his voice rising slightly to command the room. Apex Capital did not just walk away. The debts your company owed to 3 major banks were categorized as toxic assets yesterday morning. The banks were preparing to foreclose on your corporate assets and your private estate this afternoon. Thaddeus looked up, his eyes bloodshot and filled with absolute despair. You let them foreclose? We're homeless. No, I said, standing up from the far end of the table. I walked slowly down the length of the room. The only sound was the sharp click of my heels against the floor. I stopped right next to my father's chair. I looked down at him. He looked so incredibly small. The banks did not foreclose, I told him, keeping my voice perfectly steady. Because yesterday afternoon, a private investor stepped in and purchased the entirety of Thaddeus Freight's debt portfolio in one lump sum. Paid in full. In cash. Thaddeus stared at me, his brain struggling to catch up. Someone bought our debt? Who? Why? Leander handed me the white envelope. I pulled out the single sheet of thick, watermarked paper inside. It was a transfer of ownership certificate. I dropped it onto the table, right on top of the spilled water. Read the name of your new primary creditor, Dad, I commanded. Thaddeus leaned over, his shaking fingers tracing the bold black ink on the official document. He read the name. His breath hitched in his throat. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror, awe, and complete disbelief. Vesper, he whispered, as if the name burned his tongue. You? But Una said you were broke. You do not have that kind of money. You are unemployed. 4 days ago, I sold my tech startup for $25 million, I said, the words falling like heavy stones onto the table. I used a fraction of that money to buy your debt from the banks. So, I am not your daughter today, Thaddeus. I am the sole owner of your debt. I own your company. I own your warehouses. And I own the marble floor you made me scrub on my hands and knees. The shock that hit the room was absolute. Una stopped crying, staring at me with her mouth hanging wide open. Cressida let out a soft gasp. Thaddeus just stared at the document, entirely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the plot twist that had just destroyed his entire reality. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. It was the kind of silence that follows a massive explosion, where the ringing in your ears is the only sound that exists. I looked down at the 3 people who had spent my entire life making me feel small, insignificant, and worthless. They were completely stripped of their power, their arrogance, and their illusions. They were naked to the truth. Thaddeus was the first to break. The realization that the daughter he had abused, the daughter he had banned from his dinner table to avoid embarrassment, was now a multi-millionaire who literally owned his existence, fractured his fragile ego completely. He pushed his chair back, dropping to his knees right there in the boardroom. He reached out, his hands grasping frantically at the fabric of my suit skirt. Vesper, please, he sobbed, tears and snot running down his face, completely abandoning any shred of dignity. I am so sorry. I was wrong. I was so incredibly wrong about you. You are brilliant. You are successful. Please, do not take the company. Do not take the house. We are family. I love you, Vesper. I have always loved you. I looked down at his grasping hands. I felt absolutely nothing. No pity. No triumph. Just a cold, sterile emptiness where my love for him used to be. Let go of me, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. He instantly snatched his hands back, looking up at me with wide, terrified eyes like a beaten dog. You do not love me, Thaddeus, I told him, stepping back. You love my $25 million. You love the fact that I can save you. If I had walked in here today in my old sweater, you would have thrown me out to the curb. Blood does not magically create love when it is convenient for you. I turned my attention to Una. She was gripping the arms of her leather chair so tightly her knuckles were white. She looked utterly pathetic, a spoiled child realizing there was no one left to clean up her mess. Una, I said sharply. She flinched. Vesper, listen. I can explain the money. You're fired, I interrupted, my voice cracking through the room like a whip. Effective immediately. You will clear out your desk at Thaddeus Freight by noon today under the supervision of corporate security. You will surrender your company car, your corporate credit cards, and your building access. You cannot fire me. Una screamed, her face twisting into an ugly mask of rage and panic. I am the marketing director. I built that brand. You cannot just walk in here and ruin my life. I did not ruin your life, I replied smoothly. You ruined it when you stole $400,000. Be thankful I am only firing you because my lawyers have drafted a criminal complaint detailing every single wire fraud transfer you made to Emerald Solutions. It is sitting on Leander's desk. Una's scream died in her throat. She looked at Leander, who nodded solemnly, confirming the threat. She collapsed back into her chair, burying her face in her hands, sobbing hysterically. I turned back to Thaddeus, who was still kneeling on the floor, weeping. Get up, I ordered. He scrambled back into his chair, wiping his face with his sleeve, looking at me with desperate, pleading eyes. Here are the conditions of your survival, I stated, leaning over the table, pressing my hands flat against the wood, mirroring the dominant posture Leander had taken earlier. I am not giving you a $50,000 check to bribe a city official. I am restructuring the debt. I will inject enough capital into the company to fix the warehouse legally and keep the payroll running. But you will no longer be the CEO. Thaddeus gasped, clutching his chest. Vesper, no. It is my company. I built it. You destroyed it, I corrected him coldly. I am bringing in an independent management firm to run the daily operations. You will step down as CEO immediately and assume an advisory role with no executive power and no access to company funds. You will sign over 75% of your equity shares to me to cover the $400,000 your wife and daughter stole, plus the cost of the debt acquisition. 75%? Thaddeus choked, looking like he was about to have a heart attack. That leaves me with nothing. You are stealing my legacy. I am saving you from federal prison. I shouted, my voice finally rising, letting 28 years of suppressed anger bleed into the words. If you do not sign the equity transfer today, I will trigger the debt default tomorrow morning. I will seize the company. I will seize the estate. And I will hand the forensic audit over to the FBI and watch my mother and my sister go to federal prison for wire fraud and corporate embezzlement. Is that what you want? The room went dead silent again. The threat was absolute. The evidence was irrefutable. I had them completely cornered, and there was no way out. Thaddeus looked at his wife, who was shaking uncontrollably. He looked at Una, who was a ruined, sobbing mess. And then, he looked at me. He finally saw me. He saw the cold, rational, unbreakable woman he had created through years of neglect and abuse. He slowly reached into his breast pocket, pulled out his expensive gold fountain pen, and looked at the equity transfer documents Leander slid across the table. His hands shook so violently he could barely hold the pen. He signed his name on the dotted line, effectively surrendering his empire, his power, and his pride to the daughter he had treated like a servant. Cressida signed the CFO authorization right after him, tears dripping onto the expensive paper, smearing the ink. When the final signature was complete, Leander gathered the documents, placing them securely into his leather briefcase. The meeting is adjourned, Leander announced. I did not say another word. I turned on my heel and walked out of the massive double doors, leaving my broken family sitting in the ruins of their own making. As I walked down the quiet, carpeted hallway of the 40th floor, I did not feel a rush of euphoria. I did not feel the need to laugh or gloat. I just felt incredibly, wonderfully light. The massive, suffocating weight I had carried on my chest for my entire life was finally gone. I was free. 2 months passed since the dramatic confrontation on the 40th floor of Apex Capital. The leaves on the trees began to turn a brilliant shade of gold and crimson, signaling the arrival of a crisp, beautiful autumn. My life settled into a quiet, peaceful rhythm that I had never known before. It was a Saturday morning, and I was sitting on the wooden deck of the modest 3-bedroom house Leander and I still shared. Despite the $25 million sitting in our accounts, we had no desire to move into a massive, cold mansion. This house was our sanctuary. It was where we had built our love, and no amount of money could buy the warmth that lived inside these walls. I held a steaming mug of black coffee in my hands, feeling the heat seep into my palms as I watched Leander carefully prune the rose bushes in the small garden. He was wearing his favorite faded gray sweatpants and a worn-out t-shirt, looking completely at peace. The aftermath of my hostile takeover had been swift and devastatingly thorough, playing out exactly as the forensic audit predicted. Thaddeus Freight was currently undergoing a massive internal restructuring. The independent management firm I installed had cleaned house, firing dozens of redundant executives Thaddeus had hired simply because they were his friends. The company was finally turning a legitimate profit again, the massive leaks plugged. Thaddeus was technically still on the payroll as an advisor, but his office had been moved to the basement floor, and no one answered his emails. He was a ghost haunting his own former empire. Una's fall from grace had been the most spectacular. Stripped of her corporate credit cards and her six-figure salary, her fragile, expensive world collapsed within 3 weeks. Without the stolen money to fund her lifestyle, her friends abandoned her immediately. She could not afford the rent on her luxury downtown loft, and the leasing office evicted her. Last week, Leander had come home with a rare, grim smile on his face. He told me that one of his junior analysts had stopped by a high-end department store to buy a gift for his wife. The analyst had been rung up by a new cashier working the perfume counter. It was Una. She was standing on her feet for 8 hours a day, wearing a polyester uniform, scanning barcodes for minimum wage to pay off the massive mountain of personal credit card debt she had accumulated. The $1,200 Jimmy Choo shoes were gone, replaced by sensible, non-slip rubber soles. And the grand, sweeping estate with the cold marble kitchen floor? It was gone. Because I owned the massive debt portfolio, I had technically owned the mortgage on the house. I could have let them stay, but the memory of scrubbing that floor on my hands and knees while they insulted me was too toxic to let stand. I initiated the foreclosure process. The estate was seized, the expensive furniture auctioned off, and the property was sold to a lovely, quiet couple who planned to turn it into a bed and breakfast. Thaddeus and Cressida had been forced to downsize drastically. They now lived in a small, cramped 2-bedroom apartment in a very average suburb. I heard from a distant aunt that Thaddeus spent his days sitting on a cheap sofa, watching daytime television, completely stripped of his ego and his false importance. I took a slow sip of my coffee, breathing in the crisp morning air. I thought I would feel a sense of triumphant, malicious joy watching their lives fall apart. I thought I would want to drive past Una's department store just to laugh at her in her uniform. But I didn't. I felt absolutely no desire to rub their faces in the dirt. I realized something profound sitting on that deck. True power, the kind of power that actually heals you, is not about destroying the people who hurt you. It is about the absolute freedom of setting unbreachable boundaries. It is the power to say no and never have to explain yourself again. I did not ruin them out of spite. I simply stopped protecting them from the consequences of their own horrific actions. Gravity did the rest. Leander walked up the wooden stairs of the deck, dusting the dirt off his hands. He leaned down and kissed the top of my head, the scent of earth and pine clinging to his clothes. "You are thinking hard," he noted quietly, pulling out a chair and sitting next to me. "What is on your mind?" "Just everything," I smiled softly, leaning my head against his shoulder. "I was just thinking about how different everything feels. I feel like I am finally breathing real air." Leander wrapped his arm around my waist, pulling me close. "You survived a war, Vesper. It takes time to get used to the peace. But you earned every single second of it." My phone buzzed on the small patio table. I reached over and glanced at the screen. It was a text message. The name on the caller ID made my stomach give a tiny, involuntary flutter, an old reflex from a past life. It was from my mother, Cressida. I stared at the glowing screen for a long moment before picking it up. I opened the message. "Vesper," the text read. "I know we have no right to ask you for anything. But Una is struggling. She cannot afford her rent with the retail job, and she is on the verge of being evicted from her cheap apartment. Thaddeus and I cannot help her. Our pensions barely cover our own rent. I know you own the new management firm running the logistics company. Please, Vesper, can you just get her a job as a janitor in the warehouse? Anything to give her a steady paycheck. She is your sister. Please have mercy." I read the message twice. The sheer, tragic irony of the request was almost poetic. My mother, the woman who had watched me scrub her floor and tossed a $20 bill at me like a stray dog, was now begging me to hire her golden child to clean toilets. I looked at the text message. I thought about Una's sneering face. I thought about the stolen college funds. I thought about the $400,000 she had embezzled to buy shoes while I worked myself to the bone. I did not feel anger. I just felt a profound, exhausted apathy. I tapped the screen. I did not type a reply. I simply pressed the read receipt button, ensuring that Cressida knew I had seen her desperate plea. And then I locked the phone, set it face down on the table, and turned back to watch my husband tend to the garden we had built together. The cycle of abuse was finally, permanently broken. I was entirely done bleeding for people who only loved me when they needed a transfusion. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in deep shades of purple and burnt orange, Leander and I sat by the fire pit in our backyard. The crackle of the burning wood was the only sound disrupting the quiet suburban night. I held a glass of red wine, swirling the dark liquid, watching the flames reflect in the crystal. I got a text from my mother today, I told Leander, breaking the comfortable silence. Leander paused, a small piece of kindling in his hand. He looked at me, his protective instincts immediately flaring in his eyes. What did she want? Money? She wanted a job for Una, I said, a small, wry smile touching my lips. She asked if I could pull strings with the new management firm to hire Una as a warehouse janitor. Apparently, she is about to be evicted. Leander scoffed, tossing the wood into the fire, watching the sparks fly upward into the night sky. A janitor. After she stole nearly $500,000 from the company and bought designer bags with it. The audacity is actually impressive. What did you say? I didn't reply, I answered, taking a sip of the wine. I just left it on read. I let the silence be my answer. Leander nodded slowly, a look of deep respect settling over his features. Good. Engaging with them, even to say no, just gives them a foothold back into your life. You cut the infected tissue out, Vesper. Do not let them sew it back on. He was right. Blood does not give you the right to be cruel. Family is not a blank check for abuse, manipulation, and endless forgiveness. I spent my entire life believing that if I just worked harder, if I was just a little bit better, they would finally see my value. I thought my worth was tied to their validation. But staring into the fire, holding the hand of the man who loved me when I had nothing, I realized the ultimate truth. My value was never the problem. Their inability to see it was. They were broken people, obsessed with appearances, hollow on the inside, desperate to fill the void with stolen money and fragile egos. I did not owe them my success. I did not owe them my $25 million. And I certainly did not owe them my mercy. I looked up at the stars beginning to peek through the twilight. I had my husband. I had my freedom. I had my peace. For the first time in 28 years, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I was no longer the scapegoat. I was the architect of my own life, and the foundation was completely solid. The ashes of Thaddeus Freight, the empty halls of the foreclosed estate, and the polyester uniform Una now wore were not monuments to my revenge. They were simply the natural consequences of their own actions finally catching up to them. I just stopped standing in the way of the train they had built. Now, I turn to you, the jury listening to my story. I need your honest opinion. Recently, my mother texted me begging me to give Una a job as a janitor because she is about to be evicted from her tiny apartment. I left the message on read and completely ignored it. Was I too cruel in ignoring her plea, or is this punishment completely deserved after everything they put me through? What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you found my journey satisfying and want to hear more stories of people taking back their power, please hit the like button and subscribe to the Payback Diaries. It helps the channel grow and reach more people who might be going through the same thing. Don't forget to check out the 2 amazing videos currently on your screen.